The rain hadn't stopped since midnight. It fell in sheets over the Gothic rooftops of Ashfield Academy, turning the old cobblestones into slick mirrors of gray. The cold wind whipped through the pine trees that lined the century-old campus, as if nature itself were trying to wash something away, secrets perhaps, or guilt. But inside the towering stone buildings of Ashfield, life marched on exactly as it had for nearly 200 years, polished, privileged, and carefully protected. Room 207, located in the east wing of the science building, was a long, high-ceilinged classroom with 3 rows of polished mahogany lab tables and windows that reached almost to the ceiling. The classroom was warm, filled with the low hum of conversation and the faint smell of chalk dust and electronics. At the front, a digital whiteboard flickered softly as students filtered in, all wearing the Ashfield uniform, navy blazers with gold crests, silk ties, and expensive shoes. Everyone looked like they belonged in a catalog. Everyone, that is, except for Elijah Brooks. 17-year-old Elijah sat in the front row, head slightly bowed over his physics notes. He was tall and slim. His dark skin contrasted beautifully against the crisp white of his dress shirt. His fingers moved quickly over a sleek tablet as he rewrote equations for magnetic field fluctuations, something most of his classmates couldn't even pronounce. He wasn't just smart, he was brilliant, and that was the problem. Elijah wasn't supposed to be here, not according to some of the students, and certainly not according to a certain teacher. He wasn't from a family of CEOs, politicians, or venture capitalists. He wasn't on the legacy list or the donor wall. Elijah had earned his spot with a full academic scholarship, scoring perfect marks on every test the admissions office could throw at him. He came from the south side of Atlanta, raised by a single mother who worked nights at the city library and weekends cleaning offices. And despite all of that, or maybe because of it, he was top of the class at Ashfield Academy, which made him a target. Ms. Diana Calloway entered the classroom like a thundercloud. She was a tall, pale woman in her early 50s with sharp cheekbones, silver glasses, and a no-nonsense bun. She had taught physics at Ashfield for 27 years and had a reputation for being stern but fair. At least, that's what the Ashfield brochure said. Those who really knew her, especially students of color, had seen another side, cold, dismissive, and quietly condescending. She rarely smiled, and when she did, it was never in Elijah's direction. "Elijah," she said, pausing at his table. As she scanned the lab seating chart, "You're paired with Nathan Whitmore today." A ripple moved through the room. Elijah didn't react, but he felt it. He always felt it. Nathan, seated 1 row behind, scowled as he picked up his books and slowly made his way to Elijah's table, making sure to let out an exaggerated sigh as he dropped into the stool beside him. Nathan was everything Elijah wasn't: white, blonde, cocky, and the only son of Ashfield's largest donor. His father owned a national defense company that made billions off government contracts. Nathan didn't need to study, didn't need to impress. He had already been accepted to Yale, early decision 3 years ago, thanks to legacy and a few million in donations. He didn't like Elijah, and Elijah knew exactly why. As the lesson began, Ms. Calloway introduced the group project, a live demonstration of Faraday's law of induction using electromagnets and copper wire coils. Elijah listened attentively, not because he needed to, but because he loved learning. Physics wasn't just a subject to him. It was a language, a rhythm, a puzzle waiting to be solved. While Nathan fiddled with the components without direction, Elijah effortlessly began wiring the coils, adjusting the variable resistor, and fine-tuning the sensors with methodical precision. "Whoa," Nathan muttered sarcastically, watching. "Elijah work. Calm down, Einstein. You trying to build a nuclear reactor?" "I'm just doing the experiment," Elijah said, his voice calm and measured. Ms. Calloway approached their table, arms crossed. "Elijah," she said, eyeing the setup, "where did you learn to do that variation?" I don't recall demonstrating that method. Elijah looked up, holding her gaze respectfully. It's a modification I read in a recent paper from MIT's Youth Research Initiative. I did a prototype during my summer program there. Several students glanced over, intrigued. One whispered, MIT? Another chuckled, show off. Nathan looked like he wanted to throw something. Ms. Calloway's jaw tightened. Let's keep things simple, shall we? This isn't the MIT lab. This is Ashfield Academy, and we follow the standard procedure. Elijah blinked but said nothing. He made the required changes without protest, but deep inside, he felt the sting, again. This wasn't about protocols. This was about putting him in his place. Later that afternoon, as Elijah walked toward his locker to switch books before English Lit, he noticed something that made his breath catch. Someone had scratched the word imposter across the metal of his locker. Crude, deep, and deliberate. He stood there for a long second, alone in the hallway, listening to the laughter coming from a group of seniors down the corridor. He knew who had done it. He didn't have proof, but he knew. Nathan and his crew had been hounding him since day one. He reported the incident to Vice Principal Kearns, who offered a sympathetic smile and a clipboard. We'll look into it, he said, already placing the file into a drawer. No apology, no urgency, no justice. That night, Elijah sat on the edge of his bed in Ashfield's dormitory, staring out the frost-covered window as the wind howled against the old glass. His roommate, Oliver, a quiet kid from Tokyo, was already asleep. Elijah pulled out his tablet and began typing notes about the incident. Date, time, locker number. He created a new folder titled Incidents. Deep down, he had a feeling he'd need to keep track. The next morning, something even stranger happened. When Elijah arrived at class, he found his lab kit missing from the cabinet. His name label had been ripped off. Ms. Calloway claimed he must have misplaced it and offered no replacement. Nathan, of course, laughed quietly and handed him a cracked, outdated set of tools. Elijah, Ms. Calloway said sharply, please try to be more responsible. This isn't a public school where materials go missing without consequence. The entire class went silent. Elijah swallowed hard. He could feel every eye on him. He looked at her, really looked, and realized something chilling. She didn't see him. Not really. She saw a stereotype, a threat, an outsider. Not a student, not a scholar, not a boy with a dream. That was the moment something in Elijah shifted. He would no longer play it safe. He would keep every receipt, every screenshot, every encounter, because something was building and he could feel it. Ms. Calloway was going to make a move, and when she did, he'd be ready. But what he didn't know was that the trap was already being set, and the person helping her was closer than he imagined. A week passed, but the locker incident stayed with Elijah like a ghost that refused to leave. Every morning he walked into Ashfield Academy's corridors with the same posture, shoulders relaxed, chin up, backpack tight against his back. But, behind his calm exterior, he was quietly bracing for impact. Something unspoken shifted in the air. Conversations paused when he walked past. Smirks lasted a second too long. Doors that once opened with a greeting now closed before he reached them. A silent wall was forming, and he could feel it building around him like bricks of ice. But Elijah didn't flinch. He doubled down on his studies. His test scores remained perfect, his projects inventive. While others struggled to solve complex equations in theoretical physics, Elijah had already simulated them using code he had written from scratch. His essays were being quietly circulated by teachers as model work, though none dared to praise him aloud in front of certain students. He was a rising star. But stars in some skies were unwelcome. It began with small manipulations, Notes vanished. From his desk, lab worksheets replaced with outdated copies. Study groups mysteriously canceled minutes before he arrived. Then came the whispering. It slithered through the halls like smoke, barely visible but choking all the same. He's too perfect. Betty cheats. You don't get scores like that unless someone's helping you. It was subtle, controlled, intentional. But Elijah heard it all. The source. Nathan Whitmore. Always Nathan, but never alone. Behind him stood the shadowy alliance of privilege, sons of senators, heirs to fortunes, future CEOs in training. They had grown up together in summer camps for the elite, boarding schools for the pedigreed. Elijah's presence wasn't just uncomfortable, it was unforgivable. The turning point came during a Monday morning assembly. The headmaster announced the upcoming selection process for the National Academic Scholars Invitational, a prestigious science competition that served as a direct gateway to Harvard, Stanford, and MIT. The best student in the school would be selected to represent Ashfield. For years, it had always been someone from the Whitmore family, or at least one of their close circles. But this year, the name on everyone's lips was not Nathan Whitmore. It was Elijah Brooks. That very night, Nathan held a closed-door meeting in the common room of Dormitory A, the one with the fireplace, the leather chairs, and the walls lined with family portraits. He wasn't alone. 3 others joined him: Leo Morgan, the lacrosse captain, Bryce Hollander, the head of the student council, and Declan Rhodes, whose family practically funded the library. The room reeked of entitlement and polished brandy, though none of them were of age. On the table were Elijah's class rankings, copies of his essays stolen from the teacher's lounge, and a tablet showing posts from an anonymous forum where rumors had already started swirling. "He's making us all look like fools," Nathan hissed. "Every test, every lab, every damn class. And now he's going to take the invitational too?" Leo leaned back, arms crossed. "So what do you want to do? Beat him fair and square?" Nathan's laugh was cold. "You don't beat a kid like that fair and square. He's not playing the same game. He's got something else going on. No one gets perfect scores like that. Not without help." Bryce tapped the screen. "We plant something just believable enough. Then let the system do the rest." "What if it backfires?" Declan asked. Nathan looked around slowly. "It won't. You think the administration's going to side with him? With a scholarship kid from Atlanta? Over me?" He grinned. "All we need is the right ally." That ally came in the form of Ms. Diana Calloway. It didn't take much convincing. Nathan caught her in the hallway after class, holding the door open like a gentleman. "Ms. Calloway," he began, voice syrupy with respect. "Can I talk to you about something sensitive?" She raised a brow. "It's about Elijah. I know he's brilliant, but I'm worried. He's been acting strange. His lab reports are too perfect, like he already knows the results before the experiment." "Ms." Calloway hesitated. "Go on." "I saw him with a flash drive last week in the lab. He plugged it into the school's computer system. I don't know what he was doing, but he seemed really secretive." Calloway's face tightened. "And one more thing," Nathan added. "I overheard him on the phone the other day. He said something about needing to sell gear fast before someone noticed." He shrugged, as if it pained him to say it. "Maybe it's nothing, but I thought you should know." That was all it took. Confirmation bias did the rest. Ms. Calloway had never trusted Elijah. She had never understood how someone like him, someone from outside the Ashfield mold, could be so confident, so composed, so capable. Nathan's words didn't plant the seed. They simply watered what was already buried deep inside. By Wednesday, the whispers had turned into accusations. Elijah hacked the grade system. Elijah stole lab equipment. Elijah's dangerous. Screenshots started circulating. Messages. supposedly from Elijah talking about selling sensitive hardware. Anonymous posts linked him to a gang back in Atlanta. Fake Instagram accounts used AI to alter photos of him to make him look angry, suspicious, criminal. It was a digital smear campaign designed to erode his credibility inch by inch. Elijah noticed the change immediately. Students avoided eye contact. Some teachers suddenly marked his assignments with odd red comments. Too advanced, suspicious phrasing? His locker was searched twice without explanation. One morning, he found a note slipped into his calculus. Textbook. You'll never belong here. Still, he didn't lash out. He didn't cry. He documented everything, screenshots, notes, emails. He built a digital folder labeled Truth. Friday afternoon, during lunch, Elijah walked into the dining hall only to find his usual seat taken. The whole table, students he had studied with for months, looked up in awkward silence. One of them, Maria, finally said, "Sorry, Elijah. We're kind of full today." He nodded quietly and walked out. Not angry, not defeated. Just done. That night, Elijah called his mother. "Hey, Mom." Her voice was warm, always calm. "How's my baby genius?" He paused. "It's hard right now. There's stuff going on. But I'm okay. I'm just keeping my head down." There was silence on the other end. Then she said softly, "Don't keep your head down, Elijah. You earned that seat. You earned that school. If they try to take that away, you stand tall." "I know, Mama," he whispered. "I'm trying." And so he stood tall. But what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the final trap had already been set. Saturday morning. Cold. Silent. Elijah walked into the chemistry lab to retrieve his notebook. The building was almost empty. He passed the supply closet and noticed something strange. The door was ajar. He peeked inside. It was empty. Or mostly empty. The shelf where the school's most expensive equipment, thermal imaging sensors, radiation counters, magnetic spectrometers, was usually locked up, was half bare. Elijah frowned. Something wasn't right. The next day, during the weekly dorm inspection, the school security officer stopped at Elijah's room. "We've received a tip," he said flatly. "Need to check your locker." Elijah, confused but calm, nodded. "Sure." The officer opened the metal locker slowly. Inside, on top of his books, was a cloth bag. Inside that bag, several $1,000s worth of stolen lab equipment. Elijah's heart stopped. "What is this?" he asked, voice low. The officer didn't answer. Ms. Calloway arrived moments later, her face twisted in smug horror. "You brought this on yourself, Elijah," she said. "You had so much promise." "I didn't put that there." She didn't respond. The headmaster was called. So was the police. And as Elijah sat on a bench in the hallway, waiting for the world to fall apart, he quietly tapped open his phone, scrolled to his secure cloud folder, and pressed Send All. To one number. His mother's. The cops hadn't even arrived yet. The room was still buzzing with teachers and staff, security and murmurs, when someone pushed open the main doors with quiet force. She walked in, not like a storm, but like a reckoning. Immaculately. Dressed, eyes burning with righteous fury, calm and collected, Marcia Brooks was not just Elijah's mother. She was a Harvard-educated civil rights attorney, and she was about to burn Ashfield Academy to the ground, with truth. The halls of Ashfield Academy had never known silence like this. Not even during final exams did tension ripple like it did now. Outside the main administrative office, a dozen faculty members stood frozen, their murmurs tangled with confusion and nervous curiosity. Elijah sat silently on the wooden bench, hands resting calmly on his lap, though inside his pulse thundered like war drums. His breathing was slow, measured, controlled. His eyes, though calm on the outside, held back a storm that had been building for weeks, a storm nobody expected to erupt with the power and precision it was about to deliver. At exactly 11:08 a.m., the front glass doors of Ashfield opened, and Marcia Brooks walked in. She was dressed not like a mother coming to defend her son, but like a lawyer prepared to dismantle an institution. Black heels clicked sharply against the tile floor. A tailored navy pantsuit hugged her silhouette with dignified elegance. Her locks were pulled back into a neat, commanding bun. Her skin glowed against the morning light, and her eyes burned with something more powerful than rage: clarity. The receptionist opened her mouth to ask who she was, but stopped when she saw the federal DOJ badge clipped to her belt. Marcia didn't introduce herself. She didn't need to. She walked directly past the stunned staff and toward the conference room where Headmaster Willoughby and Ms. Calloway had summoned the police. She opened the door without knocking. Inside sat 4 people: Elijah's physics teacher, Ms. Diana Calloway, Headmaster Willoughby, a local patrol officer named Officer Tenney, and Ashfield's security director, Mr. Granger. All of them looked up, startled. Ms. Calloway blinked and leaned back, her arms crossed with forced calm. The headmaster rose halfway from his chair. "May I help you?" Marcia Brooks shut the door behind her with a soft click and placed a thick manila folder on the center of the polished oak table. "You can sit down," she said quietly. Headmaster Willoughby sat. "I'm Marcia Brooks, civil rights attorney, Harvard Law graduate, licensed in 3 states, and a consultant for the Department of Justice. I'm also the legal guardian and mother of Elijah Brooks, the student you are attempting to falsely accuse of theft, academic dishonesty, and, as I understand it, potentially arrest based on evidence you cannot verify." No one moved. Ms. Calloway narrowed her eyes. "Ms. Brooks," she said, her voice syrupy, "I understand you're upset, but you must realize we're simply responding to evidence found in your son's possession. Do you have a warrant to search my son's personal belongings?" Marcia asked. Silence. "Did you notify a legal guardian before performing that search or contacting the authorities?" More silence. Officer Tenney looked away. Marcia opened the manila folder slowly and began sliding items onto the table, one by one. "You will find in this file a signed character reference from Dr. Raymond Cho, head of the MIT Summer Research Program Elijah attended. You will also find security footage timestamps showing exactly when and where Elijah entered the science building this morning, footage you conveniently forgot to check." She paused. "And here," she added, holding up a flash drive between 2 fingers, "are metadata reports from the school's own surveillance system that I subpoenaed within the hour after Elijah texted me. It includes digital fingerprints of the student who accessed the lab storage using a duplicate key." Ms. Calloway's face began to tighten. "Would you like to know who it was?" Marcia asked, raising a brow. "Because the footage clearly shows Nathan Whitmore at 6:41 a.m. entering the supply room alone. No Elijah in sight." Headmaster Willoughby shifted in his chair, suddenly pale. Marcia wasn't finished. She opened her phone and tapped to play a recording. It was a voice memo. Crackling audio filled the room, Nathan's voice talking to his friends late one night in the common room. Loud, bragging, arrogant. "You think they're gonna believe him over me? The kid's from Atlanta. All I gotta do is plant the stuff, and let Ms. Calloway handle the rest. Trust me, she hates him already. She's just waiting for a reason." The room fell utterly silent. You could hear the air conditioner hum against the ceiling. Elijah, standing just behind his mother, kept his eyes on Ms. Calloway. She couldn't look back. Officer Tenney cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, I think this may be more of a school issue after all." "Incorrect," Marcia said. This is now a civil rights violation, a defamation case, and potentially a hate crime depending on what further investigation reveals. I've already notified my firm and will be issuing subpoenas for every student, staff member, and administrator involved, Headmaster Willoughby stammered. Perhaps we should wait to jump to legal conclusions. Let's collect more facts. You already jumped, she replied coldly. When you allowed a white teacher to accuse a black student without a shred of due process. When you called the police without informing his guardian. When you let that teacher scream, "He's dangerous," to a hallway of students while he stood there, hands up, completely calm, Calloway finally snapped. This is absurd. Are we just supposed to ignore the optics? That a student from his background could be capable of... Elijah flinched, but his mother didn't. Say it, Marcia said. Say what you're really thinking. From what background? Working class? Black? Intelligent? What exactly threatens you, Ms. Calloway? Calloway stood up sharply. I won't be spoken to like this. Then don't speak at all, Marcia replied, her voice like steel. You've already done enough damage. Officer Tenney began quietly gathering his things. He knew he was out of his depth. The room began to unravel. Outside in the hallway, news had already spread like wildfire. Students whispered near lockers. Phones buzzed. Word was out. Elijah's mother was here. She was a lawyer, and she wasn't playing games. Inside the conference room, Marcia delivered her final words before standing. We'll be filing civil complaints, and we'll be holding a press conference. Because it's time that Ashfield's spotless record face some truth. Before she left, she turned to the headmaster and asked one final question. Tell me, Mr. Willoughby, what would you have done if Elijah hadn't had a mother like me? The question lingered like smoke. She didn't wait for an answer. Elijah walked behind his mother in silence, down the long corridor of Ashfield's central wing, past teachers who suddenly looked away, past students who stared at him with a new understanding. Not pity, not even fear, respect. He hadn't screamed. He hadn't begged. He hadn't run. He had trusted the truth, and the truth had come. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and the light in room 207 dimmed to gold, Ms. Calloway sat alone at her desk, staring at her empty classroom. Her reputation, her security, her mask, gone. But the storm wasn't over yet. It was only beginning. The storm that had cracked the surface of Ashfield Academy didn't just fade away. It exploded. By the following morning, the school's name was trending across social media platforms, not for its ivy-covered buildings or prestigious alumni network, but for one name, Elijah Brooks. Someone in the hallway had recorded the confrontation between Ms. Calloway and Elijah right at the moment she screamed for the police, claiming Elijah was getting aggressive, even though the footage clearly showed him standing with both, hands up, calm and composed. The clip, just 36 seconds long, was enough to make its way to Twitter, TikTok, Reddit, and the inboxes of local and national journalists within hours. By noon, it had over 2.4 million views. Justice for Elijah was trending globally. In one video, someone had stitched together Elijah's quiet explanation to the headmaster with Ms. Calloway's frantic 911 call. The contrast made people sick. The internet was not kind to Ashfield. Headlines began pouring in. Elite Academy accused of racial profiling honor student. Brilliant black student falsely accused. Mother steps in, destroys lies with evidence. Ashfield Academy, excellence or exclusion. Meanwhile, on the Ashfield campus, everything shifted. Students who had once whispered behind Elijah's back were now sending him quiet apologies in DMs. Teachers who had treated him like a ghost now nodded at him in the halls. Even the janitorial staff, men and women Elijah had always respected and greeted, began thanking him quietly. But the most unsettling part wasn't what was said, it was what wasn't. There were no announcements from the administration, no statements of apology, no offers of restitution. It was as if the leadership had decided to survive by going silent, by hoping the news cycle would move on. But the news wasn't moving on, because Marcia Brooks wasn't letting it. That weekend, she returned not just as a mother, but with 2 attorneys from her law firm and an investigator from the Department of Education. Together, they filed a formal Title VI civil rights complaint against Ashfield Academy, citing systemic racism, discriminatory discipline practices, and violation of federal law in denying Elijah due process. Then came the press conference. Under a white tent on the lawn of a nearby hotel, Marcia stood behind a podium with Elijah on one side and her law firm partners on the other. News vans surrounded the area. Cameras flashed. Reporters leaned forward, pens ready. Elijah Brooks is not the first black student to be mistreated in a private institution, she began, but he will be one of the last to take it silently. The crowd erupted in applause. "Let me be clear," she said, voice steady but fierce. "This was never just about one teacher or one student. This is about an entire system, one that protects legacies and privilege while questioning brilliance when it comes wrapped in black skin." Then, she gestured to her son. "My son is not a criminal. He's not a threat. He's a scholar. And he is not going anywhere." Back at Ashfield, the mood had shifted from silent avoidance to full-blown chaos. Nathan Whitmore, the boy who once ruled the halls like a prince, now found students turning their backs when he entered a room. His best friends, Declan, Bryce, and Leo, began to distance themselves, terrified of being dragged into the federal investigation now taking shape. Someone had leaked the secret audio files Marcia had used, recordings where Nathan had confessed to framing Elijah. Those too went viral, and worst of all for Nathan, his own father had seen it. That evening, Nathan was called into his father's private study. The massive library reeked of cigars and power, walls lined with photos of the family posing with senators, presidents, and tech moguls. His father sat in a tall leather chair. "You embarrassed us," he said coldly. "Dad, you embarrassed this entire family. Do you understand what that means? What you've cost us? Our name is on the top of the donor wall. The Whitmore Science Center bears your grandfather's name." Nathan tried again. "He was going to take everything from me. Harvard, the competition, the respect." "Because he earned it," his father snapped. "And you tried to destroy him for that. You didn't fail because you lost. You failed because you couldn't compete." For the first time in his life, Nathan had nothing to say. His father didn't yell. He didn't rage. He simply opened a drawer, pulled out a form, and slid it across the desk. "You're being withdrawn from Ashfield. Effective immediately. You're going to a private institution overseas where you will keep your head down and disappear from the media. You are no longer part of this legacy. Consider this your final privilege." And what of Ms. Diana Calloway? She was placed on administrative leave the following Monday, but that wasn't enough for parents or the public. The leaked footage of her fake 911 call, combined with her condescending remarks in class, many of which students now submitted in written affidavits, led to a storm of emails, protests, and calls for her resignation. But the final blow came when one of her own colleagues, Ms. Lila Mensah, an African-American literature teacher, spoke out during a faculty meeting. "I've sat in the break room and listened to her scoff at the scholarship kids," Lila said. "I've heard her say they weren't our kind of student. I stayed quiet because I thought it would pass. It didn't. It got worse." That testimony ended any hope Ms. Calloway had of redemption. Meanwhile, the Department of Education's investigators uncovered even more than expected. Records showed that over the last 5 years, 98% of Ashfield's disciplinary actions had been against minority students, who made up only 8% of the school's population. The school had no formal bias training for staff. It had never conducted an equity audit. And when parents of Black and Latino students were interviewed, many revealed they'd been discouraged from applying for advanced placement courses. The case expanded. The Department of Justice opened a broader probe. The IRS began reviewing the Academy's nonprofit tax status. By the end of the month, Ashfield's board of directors issued a public statement. They would be undergoing full structural reforms. But Elijah didn't care about statements. He didn't want apologies written by lawyers. What he wanted was the truth to be acknowledged, and for others like him to never feel what he felt again. One afternoon, as Elijah walked across the quad, a group of younger students approached him, freshmen and sophomores, mostly students of color. "Hey," one of them said, her voice shaking a little. "Can we sit with you at lunch?" Elijah smiled, warm and gentle. Of course. And just like that, the table that had once rejected him became the table that everyone wanted to be at. It wasn't about fame or revenge or going viral. It was about something deeper. Dignity. Elijah Brooks had reclaimed his, and in doing so, he forced an entire institution to take off its mask. It started with a sound that wasn't loud, but carried through every corridor at Ashfield like thunder. Silence. The kind of silence that follows truth too heavy to ignore. The kind that chokes denial, flattens arrogance, and demands accountability. Ashfield Academy, once untouchable, its crest a symbol of inherited greatness, was no longer a castle on the hill. It was a crime scene, dressed in ivy. 2 weeks had passed since Marcia Brooks walked into that conference room and flipped the script, since Elijah Brooks' calm defiance and unwavering dignity exposed the rot beneath Ashfield's golden polish. But the story wasn't fading from the headlines. It was growing. Federal investigators didn't stop at Elijah's case. What they uncovered sent shockwaves far beyond Vermont. Emails from faculty revealed quiet collusion, subtle ways of undermining. Black and Latino scholarship students. A math teacher who had joked that affirmative action kids couldn't count. A counselor who encouraged minority students to apply to trade schools instead of the Ivies. Anonymous concerns filed about students not fitting in. None of it was overt, but all of it added up. The Department of Justice began preparing formal civil rights charges under Title VI. Meanwhile, the Office for Civil Rights began auditing the admissions process, citing data that exposed a stunning truth. Ashfield's acceptance rate for minority applicants was nearly 30% lower, even when grades and test scores were identical. Parents were furious, not just those with kids of color, but others too. Especially after the footage was played on national television. Elijah, standing quietly, Ms. Calloway screaming, "He's dangerous!" That image became a symbol. Memes flooded the internet. Protesters stood outside the school gates holding signs, "Black excellence threat. Ashfield must answer, we are all Elijah." But the most powerful moment came when former students began to speak out. One by one, they came forward. Marcus Allen, class of 2017, now a software engineer, tweeted, "I was a scholarship kid at Ashfield too. Same story, different year. I just didn't have Elijah's strength." Gabriela Torres, class of 2020, shared on Instagram. "They told me I didn't present like a leader. I graduated with honors, still wasn't nominated for anything, because leaders didn't look like me." Dozens more followed. A mosaic of stories that revealed one truth. Elijah Brooks had not been an isolated case. He had been a mirror held up to a system that had long refused to see itself. Inside the walls of Ashfield, power began to crumble. Ms. Calloway was fired, officially, permanently. Not quietly, not with a golden handshake. The school issued a rare public statement condemning her conduct. She was under investigation for making a false police report and violating mandatory reporting ethics as an educator. Her teaching license was suspended indefinitely. Her name became a warning, but it wasn't just her. Headmaster Willoughby, too, was forced to resign. When it was revealed that he had ignored at least 3 complaints about Calloway in previous years, all from minority students, his quiet dismissal turned into a public spectacle. He resigned, for health reasons, but the press wasn't fooled. The board of directors was restructured. Half of them stepped down. The new interim headmaster, Lila Mensa, the African-American literature teacher who had spoken truth at the faculty meeting. Her first action, implementing mandatory anti-bias training for every faculty and staff member. The second, establishing the Elijah Brooks Integrity Grant, a scholarship fund for underserved students across the country. Elijah didn't ask for that. He didn't need his name on a building, but when he saw it on the banner hanging above the auditorium stage, when the younger students clapped and stood on their feet during assembly as it was announced, he quietly wiped a tear with the back of his hand. Meanwhile, Elijah's academic dreams began to blossom in ways no one could have predicted. Harvard didn't just reach out. They invited him personally. A handwritten letter from the university president arrived at his dorm room with a full scholarship offer. It included a note. "We are not only impressed by your academic brilliance, but deeply moved by your strength, poise, and moral clarity. You belong here, and you always will. Stanford, MIT, Princeton, Caltech, even Oxford. They all followed. But Elijah remained grounded. He didn't post screenshots. He didn't brag. Instead, he called his mother. Guess who's crying in the cafeteria? He laughed, voice cracking with emotion. She didn't say anything. Just let the silence say it for her. Yet, despite the victories, Elijah couldn't forget how close he had come to losing everything. One false accusation, one racist lie, one teacher with power, and it could have all vanished. So he made a decision. He began speaking out, not for attention, but to protect others. With Marcia's help, he launched a nonprofit called Level, Leadership, Equity, and Voice in Elite Learning. Its mission? To support students of color in elite academic spaces, to help them navigate prejudice, to arm them with knowledge, legal literacy, and community. Elijah's first talk was live-streamed to over 600 high schools. Excellence should never have to explain itself, he said during his keynote. But if the world makes you explain it, do it with truth, not fear. With your chin up, not your head down. His words echoed across classrooms. Guidance counselors printed it on posters. College prep programs began using his story in training seminars. Elijah Brooks had become a national symbol, not because he wanted to, but because he stood his ground when the earth beneath him cracked open. As for Nathan Whitmore, he faded, transferred overseas. His father made a donation to civil rights organizations as damage control, but it couldn't erase the recordings. He would never attend Harvard. He would never be remembered as a prodigy. He would be remembered for what he was, a warning. And in some way, that was justice. On a quiet spring morning, 3 months after the scandal, Elijah stood in room 207 again, the same room where it began. Only this time, it was empty. He stood by the window, looking out at the campus lawns, birds weaving through the trees. A new class would begin here soon. New students would take these seats. And maybe, just maybe, they wouldn't have to carry what he carried. Ms. Mensa stepped into the room quietly. "You okay?" she asked. Elijah nodded. "I'm proud of you," she said. "Not just for surviving, for rising." He didn't reply with words. He just smiled. The sun rose over Ashfield Academy like a promise. Golden light poured across the ivy-covered stone buildings, turning the dew on the campus lawn into sparkling threads of silver. It was the morning of graduation, caps pressed, gowns draped neatly on hangers, parents arriving in sleek cars, proud smiles already beginning to shine brighter than the sun. For many students, it was just another rite of passage. For Elijah Brooks, It was something else entirely. It was survival. It was vindication. It was legacy. Inside Dormitory West, Elijah stood in front of his mirror, adjusting the black robe over his pressed white shirt. He looked taller than he had just a few months ago. Not in height, but in bearing. Stronger, calmer, changed. Behind him, taped to the wall, were reminders of everything he had been through. A photo of him and his mother. Outside the courthouse. The Harvard acceptance letter. A post-it from his roommate that simply read, "You taught me how to be brave." But the most powerful artifact was the folded piece of notebook paper resting on his nightstand, the one he had written to himself the night they searched his locker, the night Ms. Calloway screamed, "He's dangerous." On that paper were 4 words. "They will not break me." They hadn't. Not even close. The graduation stage was built in the center of the quad, where the sprawling oaks arched overhead like watchful guardians. White folding chairs stretched out in neat rows, and the Ashfield crest fluttered in the wind beside the American flag. Students shuffled in, their tassels swinging, the ceremony about to begin. Faculty filed in next, but not all of them. Ms. Calloway, of course, was absent, her name now a hushed cautionary tale. In her place sat Ms. Layla Mensa, the newly appointed head of school, dressed in ceremonial robes and glowing with quiet pride. And then came the moment no one expected. A hush fell over the crowd as Ms. Mensa took the microphone before the official. Speaker was introduced. "There are many traditions at Ashfield," she began. "Some worth preserving, others not. Today, we begin a new tradition. One where excellence is honored without prejudice. One where courage is rewarded as deeply as grades." She turned slightly, gesturing behind her. And so before we hear from our keynote speaker, it is my privilege to introduce the student speaker, chosen unanimously by faculty, staff, and most of all, his classmates. The crowd stirred. Elijah Brooks, valedictorian of the class of Ashfield 2025, please join us on stage. The applause that followed wasn't polite. It was thunderous. It didn't just fill the air, it shook it. Elijah walked to the podium slowly, every footstep echoing over gravel and memory. As he looked out over the sea of faces, parents, students, faculty, the press, his mind flashed back to that cold bench outside the headmaster's office, his locker swinging open, Calloway's voice rising like a blade. But that moment was gone. This was now. He placed his speech on the podium but didn't read it. Instead, he spoke from the heart. "When I first came to Ashfield," he said, his voice steady, "I thought I had to be invisible to succeed. Quiet enough not to offend, smart enough not to be doubted, careful enough not to be targeted." A few people shifted in their seats. But I was wrong. Being invisible doesn't protect you. Sometimes it makes you easier to erase. The truth is, I was never the problem. The problem was the system that saw my excellence as a threat instead of a triumph. He paused. The air was still. Some of you saw what happened to me and were silent. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of comfort. But silence isn't neutrality. It's complicity. No one moved. No one dared. I stand here not because I'm perfect. I'm not. I stand here because I refuse to fall. Because I had a mother who believed in me. Because I had truth on my side. And because when they tried to break me, I remembered who I was. Then softer but stronger. So if you're ever told you don't belong somewhere, remind them. You didn't get lucky. You earned it. The applause came like a wave. Sweeping, roaring, unstoppable. Some stood. Others cried. Parents hugged their children. Students who had once avoided him now wiped tears. Even teachers clapped with red eyes and regret. Elijah stepped back, his eyes meeting Ms. Mensa's. She nodded once, proud, not just of his words, but of the world he had just changed with them. That summer, Ashfield underwent a transformation no one could have imagined. The board passed sweeping reforms, blind review admissions to reduce legacy bias, cultural equity, training, a full-time equity and inclusion officer, and a student-led advisory council with voting power. The Elijah Brooks Integrity Grant received over $3.2 million in donations from alumni, organizations, and parents across the country. Other elite schools took notice. Stanmore Prep, Bexley Hall, and Lancaster Academy launched internal reviews after their own students began coming forward. Elijah's story became the catalyst for a nationwide wave of accountability in elite education. The New York Times ran a full-page headline, "One Student Stand Against a System." Subheadline, Elijah. Brooks didn't just graduate, he rewrote the rules. And as for Elijah, he chose Harvard. He moved into his dorm carrying nothing but 2 suitcases, a folder of college textbooks, and a framed photo of his mother standing on the steps of Ashfield's courthouse, fist raised, chin high. He declared a major in government, with a minor in ethics. He joined the Civil Rights Law Clinic in his freshman year. He mentored first-generation students through Level, and quietly, every Sunday morning, he visited a local community center to tutor underprivileged kids in math and physics, just like he once needed. Because Elijah Brooks hadn't just fought for himself. He had fought for everyone who ever sat in the back of the room hoping not to be noticed. Everyone who dimmed their light so no one would say, "Too bright." Everyone told, "You don't belong." Years later, during his graduation from Harvard, Elijah was once again asked to speak. This time, he began with a story. There was a teacher once who called the police on me, not because I had done anything wrong, but because she feared who I could become. He looked at the crowd, every word a stone carving something permanent into the future. But here's the thing about becoming. Once it starts, no lie, no scream, no system can stop it. Smiled. I am who she feared, and I am just getting started. The headlines may have stopped trending, the protests may have quieted, the school may have moved on with new banners, new leadership, and a revised mission statement. But what the world didn't realize was that Elijah Brooks had just begun to write his story, and it would be one that echoed far beyond the walls of Ashfield Academy, beyond the doors of Harvard, and into courtrooms, classrooms, and countries around the globe. 2 years after that fateful graduation, Elijah stood once again behind a podium, but this time it wasn't in a school. It was in Geneva, under the great vaulted ceiling of the United Nations Human Rights Council. He wore a fitted charcoal suit, no robe, no tassel. A blue ribbon, symbol of educational justice, was pinned to his lapel. His voice, calm but forceful, cut through translation headphones and interpreter booths as he addressed an audience of diplomats, educators, and global youth leaders. Injustice in education doesn't always come with slurs or fists, he said. Sometimes it wears a smile and hands you a syllabus. Sometimes it gives you a seat in the front row, then questions why you're sitting there at all. He didn't mention Ms. Calloway by name. He didn't have to. He was no longer just a student with a story. He was now a movement. The organization he had launched at Harvard Level, Leadership, Equity, and Voice in Elite Learning, had grown exponentially. It now had 68 campus chapters, including several in the UK, South Africa, India, and Canada. It offered legal support to students facing institutional discrimination, hosted leadership camps, and had published its first national report on racial inequities in gifted education. The report was downloaded over 10 million times in its first week. Journalists hailed Elijah as the next Brian Stevenson. He appeared on magazine covers, Time, The Atlantic, even GQ. But none of that changed him because the fire that forged him wasn't fame, it was truth. Elijah used every platform not to raise his own name, but to raise others. He told stories about forgotten kids in underfunded public schools, immigrant students denied proper placement, children punished for speaking out in classrooms, built to silence them, and everywhere he spoke, people asked him the same question. What kept you going? And his answer was always the same. I remembered who I was before they tried to tell me who I wasn't. Back in Atlanta, his mother, Marsha Brooks, continued her work with the Department of Justice, now leading the Division on Educational Equity. She had been nominated for a federal judgeship but declined. "Too many fights still need fists," she told Elijah once, "and mine haven't swung enough yet." She remained his biggest supporter, his most honest critic, and the woman he always saved the first row seat for, no matter the event, the country, or the award. On her birthday, Elijah surprised her with a letter, not a card, not a text, a handwritten letter. It simply read, "You didn't raise a boy, you raised a voice. And that voice is changing everything. I hope I make you proud, but I promise I'll never make you small." Meanwhile, the aftershocks of Ashfield's reckoning continued to reshape the world of education. Over 30 elite schools restructured their admissions and discipline procedures. A federal bill, the Elijah Brooks Student Protection Act, was passed, mandating civil rights training for all private schools receiving public funding or tax exemptions. A massive foundation donated $25 million to Level to build youth justice centers across America. The first one was named the Elijah Institute for Academic Dignity, built in his hometown. And then came the unexpected invitation. Ashfield Academy asked Elijah to return, not as a speaker, not as a guest, but as a board member. They didn't do it for PR. They did it because they were finally ready to listen. He hesitated. For days. He spoke with his mother, with Ms. Mensah, with former students, and finally he returned. The place where he had once been shamed now welcomed him with a bronze plaque at the entrance of room 207. It read, "This room is dedicated to the resilience of Elijah Brooks, proof that truth will always find its voice." Inside that room, Elijah sat with faculty and student leaders, helping rewrite the very curriculum that had once tried to exclude him. But he made one condition. "This can't be about me," he said. "It has to be about the kids who come after me, the ones still afraid to speak. You want me here? Let's make sure no student ever needs to be as strong as I had to be." And so, one by one, the bricks of change were laid, not by fire, not by force, but by unbreakable truth. Elijah didn't seek revenge. He sought repair. He didn't burn bridges. He rebuilt them with better blueprints. He didn't become bitter. He became brilliantly relentless. On the 5-year anniversary of the day he was falsely accused, he posted a photo on Instagram. It showed him standing in front of room 207, wearing a simple white t-shirt with 4 handwritten words, "They will not break me." In the caption, he wrote, "I kept my promise." Legacy, Elijah would later explain in a Global interview, is not about what they write on your diploma. It's about what they write into law, into policy, into the hearts of students who once believed they had to hide who they are. And when asked if he had anything left to prove, he smiled gently and said, "I proved it already when I didn't fall."